Okay, and we're recording. Steve, firstly, welcome to the Secret Life of Dad's podcast. We're so excited to have you on. Before I get into it, Steve, you might not know this, but I have actually been to your house. It's a bit of a creepy way to
That
start.
is quite creepy. Yeah, was I here?
You weren't there, no. I had the great pleasure of interviewing your wife about 2 years ago, and we went paddle boarding. And yeah, I've been in your house. So, I didn't go through your pants drawers or anything like that, Steve.
Just as well. You'd be disinfected if you did.
Oh, this is awkward. I better move things on to a super simple question to kick things off, Steve. Steve, what is the role of us dads in raising a more ecologically aware next generation of humans?
That's a really interesting question. I think that it's a lot easier now than it ever has been in the past. I can certainly see that my kids, who are at the moment twins at 4, Logan 6 in a couple of weeks' time, they're more aware of the environment and conservation than I was in my teens. It's a part of the curriculum, a part of pretty much everyday life for them. And it is important, though we lead the right way for our youngsters, that we don't lecture or sermonize. It's much more about bringing the wonder of the wild world to life, because the people who love nature are the exact same people who are going to want to protect it.
Oh my goodness, what a positive opening entendre. Is that a word? Entendre?
It is now. That's been, and I think, Steve, it's quite difficult. I think as dads, our generation of dads, because we've got this constant back and forth with screens and devices. And how do you find the balance of devices and getting your children out into the real world? Do you have much kickback with iPads and screens, or do you kind of just shun them?
So I'm going to caveat everything I say here with the fact that my kids are still young. They're still young enough that they do what I tell them to. And I'm very aware that it's not going to be this way in a few years' time. But it was one of my big rules from the start. I read a book early on called Brain Rules for Babies. And pretty much the entire book was kind of, yeah, you can say this, you can say that. There's a bit of subjectivity here. But the one thing they said 100% was no screen time before 2 and minimize screen time as much as you can throughout their young lives. And so I've really stuck with that. And it's tricky. It's really hard, even for kids at the age that mine are now. It's so enticing to them that you put them in front of an iPad and you're going to get a tantrum if you take it off them. So I keep the use as low as I possibly can. And then I try to make all the other stuff really, really fun and exciting. I make going outside as big an adventure as it possibly can be, even if we're doing nothing more than going looking for bugs in the garden and turning over bits of log looking for earwigs, or going, pond dipping. All of those things, if you can make them cool and cutting edge, then they have an allure about them that can at least rival the tech.
Do you think, out of interest in general, this is a bit of a generalisation, but do you think kids get enough of that nowadays? Do you think they get enough time outdoors and these little micro adventures where the parents take them outside and say, let's go on a walk in the garden?
No. It's a really tricky one because I am of a whole different generation. I turned 50 last year and childhood was completely different for me. When I was a kid, I was booted out the door at the very beginning of the day, didn't come back until it got dark in the evening, and I was starving hungry. I had a freedom that my children will never experience. And I know all the things that life spent outside and spent with nature gave me. And I want my kids to experience as much of that as they possibly can. There's been a lot of talk about nature deficit disorder and the fact that young people really miss a lack of sunlight and vitamin D and adrenaline. They miss that risk-taking thing that I had over and over and over again as a kid. I learnt how my body worked by beating the living daylights out of it and by coming back with grazed elbows and, fingernails ripped off and even broken bones. I can't do that with my kids because I get locked up. But at the same time, it's the way that every single child has done for the last 50,000 years, and the way that every youngster of every mammal species has done for the last 60 million years. we learn experientially. And if our youngsters don't have that, then they are going to grow up without quite such an awareness of their bodies, of what they can do, and also lacking massively all of the positivity that we can get from the outside world and from nature. And God, I am sounding like such a boring old git saying this. I sound like what my dad must have sounded like to me when I was a kid.
Not at all. I think fundamentally, since I've had our daughter, something in me, Steve, it's changed. I'm much more aware of the conservation of the planet. My daughter goes to a forest school, so I'm very aware of the time that she has outside. And I don't know what it is about, there's something, I feel like the DNA structure within me has changed. What do you think your children have taught you in the short time that they've been on this earth?
God, so much. Before I became a dad, I think I had an awful lot of male friends who were a little bit disappointed about the experience of becoming a dad. They felt like it had been a bit of a lackluster affair, like they'd been missing out on something, and that actually they weren't quite as invested as their partners had been. But I had the thunderbolt. It changed my life in an instant in ways that are so cliched, but were incredibly precious to me. I think I'd spent my entire life, I was quite an old dad. I was like my early 40s when I had my first, and I'd spent most of my life searching for the meaning of life. I was a real searcher, looking all over the world in every single possible corner, every possible way of risking my life and adventure, looking for what I was put here for. And then I had my first little boy, and I knew in that instant, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to be a dad. And I mean, God, it sounds so appallingly cozy and cliched saying it like that. But, I think that we have a selfish way in the modern world, a narcissism that perhaps allows us to lose that simplicity about, you talk about genetics, you talk about what's in our DNA. What's more powerful in our DNA than that urge to procreate? It's driven every single aspect of biology. Nothing in biology makes any sense without sexual selection, without our drive to recreate. So of course it's a powerful force there in all of our bodies, whether we realize it or not. And it wasn't until I had kids that I realized quite how powerful it is. And as for what they teach me, every single day I learn something wild, something crazy about how kids function from my youngsters, whilst also being absolutely aware that they are a tiny sample size. It's just, 3 out of 8 billion people in the world.
You mentioned this almost heightened sense of purpose around being a dad and being a parent. I'm interested, since you became a parent, has that also coincided with a heightened sense of preservation for the natural planet and the world that we live in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that conservation before I had kids was mostly about wanting to protect things that I was really into, because selfishly I didn't want to see them go. And then there was also the scientist in me that wanted certain things preserved because I know how important they are to the functioning of our planet. So they were all, fairly either kind of distracted ideals or quite selfish things. And then all of a sudden, in a heartbeat, conservation really did become about protecting the planet for them, wanting to make sure that they have the opportunities that I've had, that they get to see the things that I've seen. And that became a really, really potent drive. And all of a sudden, the devastation of environments that I've loved and had precious moments in became something deeply personal. These things are experiences that are being taken away from the people who are most precious to me.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. And just going back to, I'm so fascinated about unpicking this journey. And obviously we've chatted a little bit about your recent time as a dad in fatherhood. Can we rewind a little bit to how you mentioned at the start that it was your teenage years that you started really getting into understanding a bit more about nature and our environment? What was the pathway, the sequence of events that led you from that point in your teenage years to do everything you've done with all the adventures and everything that you've packed into your 50 years since?
It was a weird one. I went to a very average, very big comprehensive school in the middle of a then council estate, and there was no way that I could talk about my passions. If I'd gone into school and told people that I'd spent my previous day searching for butterflies, I would have had my shorts ripped down my ankles and been put head first down into a dustbin. So I hid it. I didn't know. I imagine that most people who went to school with me would be gobsmacked to see what I do for a living now, because none of them had any idea that natural history was my passion and fascination. I created an alter ego of a character that I hoped would look and appear cool enough not to get beaten up. And it's only looking back on it now that I'm kind of really disappointed in myself. But it makes perfect sense. When you're a teenager, you really want to fit in, and in a big school like mine that seemed quite frightening and scary at the time, the last thing I wanted to do was to stick out as being someone who loved blue tits.
Hey, each to their own. Each to their own.
Is that why, Steve? Is that why you decided just to get absolutely jacked instead, and you hit the gym? Because you are, I want to say, you're a physical specimen.
You two, you share something. You've both been on the cover of the same magazine.
Oh yeah,
have we?
Lawrence is like, oh, me?
Oh, I forget these things, honestly. I thought I recognised another cover model when I see one.
Because Steve, I was reading Deep Blue on the way here, and you said your first experience of seeing a shark was you were 9 years old. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and what that experience did for the rest of your life?
It was a total mistake. My folks both worked for British Airways their whole working lives, with the sole intention of being able to travel, to go to cool, wild, windswept parts of the world. And they would take my sister and I away to all sorts of places around the world. It was an amazing way to spend our childhood. We had a lot of travel. And one of those journeys was to Malaysia when I was, like you say, 9 years old. And I went out snorkeling, and I was snorkeling over a coral reef when I saw the distinctive dark silhouette of a shark coming towards me. I was like crazily excited. But then I realised that it wasn't going anywhere, and actually it was just going round and around and around me in ever-decreasing circles. And I did what every hardcore, self-respecting young naturalist would do. I panicked, climbed up out of the water onto a rock, and sat there for hours until I got such bad sunburn that I got back into the water and swam for shore. And I now know that shark was a black-tip reef shark, so was probably less than a metre in length, and couldn't have done me any well, unless it gummed me to death.
I thought you were going to say it was one of the most vicious sharks on the planet for a second.
Yeah, well, I think that it's an interesting lesson into risk and our perception of danger and real danger, which is a big part of how I've managed to make my adult living, is that big trade-off between things that we think are really, really frightening and dangerous, but might not be, and things that look perfectly fine and safe, but actually could be potentially lethal. And working out where the balance between those two things is my career.
So on those grounds, fear, most of the time, I would say fear in the average person's head is just a story. It's a story they're creating about a set of circumstances or scenario that they're faced with. But Steve, for you, fear seems like a very real instinct that's there to keep you safe when you are interacting with some of the most vicious and deadliest animals on the planet. How do you, I want to say, dance with fear more than anything else? How do you interact with that emotion in order to experience those situations and come out the other side, not just unscathed, but having talked the audience through the whole set of circumstances in such a controlled and concise way?
I could write a book about that. I where to start? I mean, there's a phrase in mountaineering, which is there are old climbers and there are bold climbers, but there are no old, bold climbers. So fear, as you say, is there for a reason. Fear is there for us to make sure that we do things sensibly, and if we don't, then we end up on the wrong side of a cliff face or of a crocodile. But at the same time, that fear does have to be rationalized and used, and particularly when you're working with animals, because the biggest cliche in working with animals is that animals can sense fear, and it is 100% true. And anyone who works with horses or dogs or wild animals will tell you that the person who is frightened is the person who will get kicked or thrown or bitten or stung, and the person who is calm and confident and knows the rules and has experience is the one who won't. And gaining and garnering that experience has taken me a quarter of a century, but I kind of feel like right now I'm on the right side of that balance. I'm in a situation where I can look at most kinds of animals and figure out if their body language is telling me that it's all right for me to be around them, or if I should do a runner. Although you never run. That's another one of the cardinal rules. But whether you should, move out their personal space and leave them well alone. So, yeah, I mean, fear is absolutely massive in my world. And learning when it's a good thing to have, learning when fear is just conning you and you need to get rid of it. And learning how to, like you said as well, learning how to tell the story is really important too, because people want to know if you're feeling frightened in the media and television. People want to feel it too. They want to feel your fear. So you need to be able to share that with them, while at the same time not letting it conquer you.
So I feel like one of your superpowers in that situation is just your vast knowledge that you have of the animals that you interact with. I'm sure the preparation that you do. But alongside that, are there any kind of physical tools that you have? Breathwork is something that springs to mind to regulate yourself and specifically your nervous system in those situations.
Breathwork is the absolute key. Yeah, it's the key to just about everything. And I have to admit, I've become in the last few years, particularly, I've become a bit of a bore about breathwork, particularly when freediving has become such a massive part of my job, and you actually start really working on breath. It's something which is so transformational in both your physical abilities and your mental well-being that it's very hard not to run down the street going, everyone needs to learn how to breathe.
But it's true.
And it's so true. It's so true. I when I was doing my whale series on Sky, which we finished last year, I think, I spent a year doing breathwork training every single day. And I got to within a gnat's chuff of 6 minutes breath hold from, 2.
Wow.
And it just transformed my ability to move underwater and to be, feel completely free in this alien environment. But it also, when I was doing my breath training at home and I was doing these like 5-minute breath holds over and over again, this calm and tranquility and peace and kind of like I'd managed to master my own body was amazing. And I mean, I couldn't keep it up. I got a nasty case of COVID and it knocked me all the way back down to, the 2s and the 3s. But for that period of time when I was, right up to the best that I could achieve, it was like I'd find nirvana.
I'm a massive breathwork fan. I was in the ice bath this morning as well.
Nice, good for you.
I love it, getting the breathwork going. But again, I think that for all the physiological advantages, I'm drawn to the mental clarity. I'm drawn to the overcoming mental resistance, so the psychological sense of it. And I think it is something, as you said, that everyone should do. Let's maybe run down the street after this shouting that everyone should do it.
Can I just ask a little bit more about the breathwork for any parents or dads who are listening to this, who perhaps, I don't know, they're a little bit stressed out, they're not sleeping. How can they integrate a bit of breath work into their lives? Because I think sometimes it's so easy to see breath work and hear you be able to do 6 minutes, but what is one thing a parent could do today that's just going to make their journey of parenting a little bit easier?
So I would say, unless you have someone to talk you through it, someone to partner you, someone to mentor you, that I would go to technology. I'd go to the apps. So I don't know what the names are of any of the apps that I've got, but I mean, I've got some simple freediving apps on my phone which just have your CO2 tables, or you're building up resistance to CO2, your O2 tables, which are enabling you to become better at storing and using oxygen. And then just some breathing applications that are teaching you to belly breathe. And, I can do some of those belly breathing exercises for 5 or 6 minutes and feel better at the end of it. The full CO2 table or the O2 table is more like 40 minutes, which is a long time for a person who's a busy dad. But I got to the stage where I was doing them watching telly. Once I put the kids down at night, I'd sit down. It used to drive Helen insane. But I'd sit there and do my breathing up and then my hold and then breathing out. It's harder if your brain's engaged. Ideally, you want to completely shut things off. But I did get to a stage where I could do other things at the same time, and it was a massive improvement. Another thing that I've got that can be done really quickly and works well for breath hold. It's going to sound like I'm plugging this. I'm not at all, because I totally paid for it, because there's a little machine called an AeroFit. Have you seen the AeroFit?
No, have you?
It's a resistance device which you can use for increasing the resistance of your breathing in and your breathing out. And then the app on your phone will set you tasks to do with either incredibly restricted breathing or incredibly restricted expiration. And you can do that for 2 or 3 minutes and come away like you have actually worked out your diaphragm and your lungs. So, that's a really, really good one for a dad. I wasn't intending saying that. I hope that I haven't breached any editorial guidelines.
All good.
Other breathing
Plug
devices
away,
are available.
I love that. I could talk about breathwork all day, but we will move on. And Steve, can you humour me for a second? This here is the first edit of an illustrated book that my daughter has been working on. And since
Amazing.
Oh, thank God for that. I thought that was yours. And when we had a coffee before.
it's called The Water Play, and because we've already been talking about sharks and whales, this book is about sharks and whales. So it'll take me 1 minute just to quickly discuss to talk you through it, then we can discuss the lessons from this, if that's okay, if everyone's happy.
Wonderful.
So once upon a time, there was a little whale called Humphrey. He loved swishing his tail around in the water. And you can see that there's
good drawing.
Illustrations for that. Pretty good.
Isn't that Steve there as well?
Yeah, that's Steve on the longboard. But one day, his mum and dad went to get some fish, and they got lost. Okay, building the suspense. But Humphrey had swam so far. Have I skipped a page? No, I'm just going to count. But Humphrey had swum so far that he had found his mum and dad at last. Now, this is where things get a little bit hairy. So you can see what's going on in this diagram here. We have whales, but we also have sharks in the picture. So, but there was a shark between Humphrey and his mum and dad. What shall they do? Shall they run away? Shall they hide? Or shall they face their fear? So, do you think they should do, Matthew?
Face their fear.
Okay. Steve?
Run away, hide.
Okay.
Where's a whale going to hide?
But Humphrey had used up all of his energy, so his brain wasn't working, and his eyes didn't work. And he swam into the shark's mouth. And the shark also ate Humphrey's mum and dad. The end.
That is brutal.
That's it.
I'm so invested in Humphrey as well.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah, well, she actually read this out to her class yesterday.
And then you were called in by the headmaster.
Yeah. Mr. Price, we meet again.
Everyone was shocked by the ending. They thought there was going to be a big moral story about facing your fears. But actually facing your fears, ended up to Humphrey and mum and dad being eaten by the shark. But my daughter was making the point that nature doesn't fit the narrative of Hollywood, the happy endings. Nature is brutal. And, think about what happened here in the water play. It's a lesson for all of us, I think. Anyway, just wanted to get your...
Very true.
Well, I love your daughter's imagination.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
it's very, very exciting.
We're actually watching your shark videos on Instagram, which may have been a little bit of an influence to that story, Steve, where you were swimming with the great white shark, and you have a bit of a chat about it being a mature male. It's got nothing to prove. And I was like, oh, that's great. So, it's extra vicious. And you're like, so I'm going to get out of the cage and swim with the shark. And we were just hands in the air going, no, Steve, what are you doing?
Steve, can I ask, what has the Steven Spielberg Jaws franchise, what are the implications on that for sharks and our generation? Because ever since I can remember, I've probably been petrified of great white sharks. What is the reality?
I mean, I don't think it's as potent a force today as it would have been in the 70s and 80s, but we have plenty of negativity in the media that probably, along the line has some ancestry to do with Jaws. Negativity in the media towards sharks and towards animals in general is, I think, incredibly impactful and very rarely in a good way. I think, sharks particularly, the statistics show that fewer than 10 people a year are killed by sharks around the world. There could be more people than that killed on the roads here in the UK in a day, and yet one single person gets harmed by a shark, and it goes worldwide. And so people get this impression that every time they're going into the sea, they are dicing with death. And anytime they're anywhere near a shark, they're within a hair's breadth of being eaten. And the fact that I've swum alongside great white sharks on repeated occasions is conclusive proof that that ain't so. And that narrative, it makes it much harder to try and put the far more important message forward that sharks are in big trouble, one of the most threatened groups of vertebrates on the planet, with perhaps 250 million being taken from our seas every single year, and most shark groups and species being at serious risk of extinction. Well, trying to convince people that they should want to do anything to protect sharks is pretty impossible when they're fed a message that sharks are evil, evil animals that are out to get you. Specifically on Jaws, I think Jaws is a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest works of fiction that's ever been made by Hollywood. It was the originator of the monster movie. It was a masterpiece of managing to create a monster that you very rarely see through the reactions of other people, and from the odd glimpsed shadow, the dialogue, the sequence in the galley of the orca when they're talking about their scars and things and winding up to the Indianapolis is one of my favorite in movie history. But there's no doubt that in the 70s and the 80s, that was probably the only representation of sharks that most people could reference, and they were thinking about it as being a giant 20-foot long shark that would maliciously stalk, hunt and kill human beings out of malice. And so, yes, it had a fantastically negative effect. And everyone from Peter Benchley, who wrote the original novel, to Spielberg himself have said there are ways that they wish they had never written it and made that film.
Wow. What is the experience like, Steve, of swimming with a great white shark?
It is, at turns, the most intimidating and spectacular experience to be had in the sea. We all have somewhere in the back of our brains, whether it's from watching, Jaws or Deep Blue Sea or any of these other monster movies, an impression of the great white as being the ultimate killer. And to see one swimming towards you, could be 5 meters long, could weigh 3/4 of a ton, 300 scalpel sharp teeth in its mouth, the ability to bite you in half with a single bite. All of those things are fighting in the battle at the back of your brain, with my own thousands of shark dives telling me that this particular animal in front of me, with its pectoral fins elevated and its body movements slow and languid, its mouth shut, its gills not billowing, is simply not in predatory mode. But those two things are both very powerful. And, the first time I got out of the water, having dived alongside a great white, I was on the verge of tears and found it a really, really emotional experience. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat. There's no other shark encounter that's quite like it, and others are in their own way just as powerful. So, for example, I've been diving in a place called Bimini in the Bahamas since the year 2000. I go back every couple of years and dive there, and I've seen it change drastically. But it's a shark sanctuary, and the best place in the world to dive with sharks, no doubt. And since about 2011, 2012, there's been one particular female great hammerhead shark that comes back to Bimini every year. Her name's Gaia. She is the biggest great hammerhead in the world, and every time she comes back, she is heavily pregnant. So last year she was ultrasounded while she was on the move and found to have, I think, 36 pups inside of her, and they are a critically endangered species. that swims out of this shark sanctuary at the end of the season and will spend the next 10 months swimming through waters where she could be caught for sport any minute of any day. She could be, picked up in a net. She could be taken by a sport fisherman. Anything could happen. And every time that Gaia comes back, there is a massive celebration from everyone on Bimini. And there's been a couple of times that Gaia has really come good for me. The first time was when I was working for the BBC making a series called Blue Planet Live, and we were trying to do the first ever live dives with great hammerhead, and there were 5.5 million people watching here in the UK. There were millions more watching in America, and we had nothing. We had completely empty seas, and it looked like all of our effort was going to come to nothing. And then Gaia glides out of nowhere, this gorgeous, great, big, calm, placid, tranquil, heavily pregnant, critically endangered great hammerhead shark. And, we won a BAFTA for that, and it was one of the highlights of my career. And then last year I went back again, like 10 years later, and I took out a bunch of kids, 10 kids, taught them all how to dive, 12 years old, got them diving with a whole range of sharks. And then on the very, very last day, their highlight was supposed to be diving with a great hammerhead. And we had the whole day, nothing turned up. And with 10 minutes, 15 minutes of light left to go at the end of the day, Gaia just turns up out of nowhere and gave those kids an experience that will completely change their lives. They're already on the road to becoming the next generation of shark scientists and shark conservationists. And it's very tricky, isn't it? Not to kind of feel like sometimes nature's looking out for you, or nature's giving you that little bit back. And Gaia's always been there for me, and she's a shark.
Wow. What do these experiences, Steve, do for you in terms of amplifying and enhancing your life experience?
Oh my gosh, I mean, they were my life experience all the way through until having kids. And now it's all about wanting to share those things with my kids, to be able to take them back to Bimini and have them meet Gaia before she disappears, which is going to happen sometime soon. All of a sudden, everything is propelled towards wanting to see the joy in their eyes as they get to see these things that I've had the privilege to do for a job for the last 25 years.
Can I just ask you, just quickly rewind, how do you do an ultrascan on a shark?
Good question.
So cool. It's really recent. So you used to have to catch and anaesthetize the animal, and it was incredibly stressful, and there was probably a fairly high mortality rate afterwards. But now the technology's improved to such an extent over the last few years that you can have an ultrasound device that is handheld, that has the scanner on the end, and as she swims past, she's doing kind of circuits coming around to this bait box that we have at a specific part of the current, so the odour's being carried away, and she'll come down that odour trail and around and down it and around, and as she swims past, the scientist literally puts the ultrasound alongside her belly, and she swims down it, and then you get to see all these teeny tiny little miniature hammerhead sharks inside her belly. It's a miracle. We've done it on manta rays, on swimming manta rays, which is, they look like little burritos rolled up inside the manta. It's just absolutely epic. Done it on stingrays. I mean, it's so cool.
I was going to ask you what your most uplifting adventure experiences are, but it sounds like that's got to be up there with one of them.
Yeah, I'm very lucky in that I've got quite a long list of those. I think probably the one that kind of connects to fatherhood the most is just as Helen was coming up 9 months pregnant with our first little boy, Logan, I went on an expedition to the Arctic, and we went making first ascents of mountains in the Stauning Alps in Greenland. And we climbed one mountain. It was a really, really frightening ascent, but we got to the top. We were categorically the first people ever to climb it. And I cleared with the local village, a couple hundred miles away, to name the mountain in the local tongue, Firstborn Son. Wow. And so there is a mountain in the middle of Arctic Greenland that is named after my little boy.
Wow. No pressure on any other dads, but that, Steve, takes some beating.
This is the bad bit, is that I did another expedition after that, and it was a desert expedition, and we explored a canyon, and I named a pool after him as well. I named it Logan's Pool. And I haven't done any of those big expeditions since we've had the twins, so they've got nothing there. Give it a couple of years' time when they realise I'm in so much trouble. I'm going to have to pretend.
You've set the bar pretty high there, Steve.
Oh, listen, you guys, there is a river in the middle of the Amazon that's named after you.
Oh, my goodness. Talking about South America, Steve, last night I watched your bullet ant ritual. Have you seen this?
No, tell me.
Oh, my. Would you be able to talk us through this, please?
Yeah. So it was for my academic studies are in venoms and poisons and toxins, and I did a program for Discovery, which was about that. It was about how venoms worked, and one element of the program was dealing with the world's most painful stinging insect, the bullet ant, and how its venom works. And there's a tribe called the Cetera Maui in Brazil who catch hundreds of bullet ants. They weave them into a pair of gloves with the stingers on the inside, and you put your hands into the glove and you dance for about 15 minutes, getting stung over and over and over and over again. And I mean, it's difficult to describe it really. For about 3 or 4 hours, there was nothing else in my world apart from pain. I wasn't really aware of anybody else who was around me. Wasn't aware of anything that was happening other than just pure, searing, white, overwhelming pain. And for about 24 hours afterwards, it was agonizing. But then you have this extraordinary rush of hormones that flooded your body, and you feel like a god. You feel like you could fly. It's just epic. I mean, you sort of understand why they do it as an initiation ceremony, because they believe that it makes you a better hunter and a better boatsman and a better forest person. I should say also that at the time, it was only the guys that did it. And I assumed that this was some kind of like outdated male macho part of their society. But no, they ensured me that the girls are absolutely allowed to do it, but they don't do it because they think it's stupid.
I love that.
In fact, Steve, you nearly lose consciousness, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I actually did. You know, watching it back, I'm barely standing up. I'm only really being held up by the guy next to me. Really a bit embarrassing considering that I was, you know, in my late 30s and most of the people who were doing it were like 13, 14 years of age.
What are we're probably going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole this, but what are the kind of craziest, scariest, you know, most immense kind of encounters and experiences that you've had out there in the great wide world?
So for me, there's a couple of different kinds of experience. There are the ones where you're watching something from a distance, where the animal has no idea that you're around, where you're doing everything you can to camouflage yourself, where you could be looking through a 1200 millimeter lens and you could be a mile away. And, you know, getting to see a snow leopard like that is phenomenal. But it's nothing compared to those very, very rare moments where a wild animal seeks out your company and wants to interact with you. It most often happens underwater and with complex, sophisticated marine mammals like seals, sea lions, fur seals, whales, dolphins. And I've been lucky enough to have it with orca, with sperm whales, dolphins. And every single time when you have one of those animals that we are divided by 80, 100 million years of evolution and appear to have nothing at all in common with, and yet they look at you as something intriguing, something that they want to play with. And, you know, in some occasions, I had a dance with a young humpback whale that lasted for an hour and a half. It just, you know, the longest interspecies play date in history. And any moment like that where a wild animal wants on its own terms to interact with you is so special.
You return back from these trips and you have experiences like that, and then next moment you're just walking down the high street back home. How does it leave you feeling
on your way to Spa?
Yeah, coming back to, you know, this world that we live in.
It used to be the hardest thing about my job. I think I had my first, and probably most out there solo trip I've ever done was just before I went to university. When I took a year off and I went solo traveling around Asia, and I did some. I mean, looking back at it now, I did some mental stuff. And then I rock up at Exeter University with a bunch of, fellow students, many of whom had never left home until that moment. And I felt like I'd spent my entire last year in a different planet. I felt like I couldn't communicate with anyone. I felt so out of sorts. I very, very nearly left university because of it. And it's got easier. It's got a lot easier because I think, you very much start to treasure the things that we have here in our world. We talk down this nation an awful lot, but having been to 115 countries around the world, this is still the place that I choose to live for a reason. We've got an awful lot going for us. And when you start to remember those things, the familiarity becomes something that you really, really value and you really treasure. And I think also, I've been doing this for such a long time. I don't feel the need now to come home and scream about all the things that I've done or have anybody impressed by the things that I've done, which as an 18, 19-year-old at university, I probably desperately wanted. So I think, I definitely feel happier when I'm on the road, when I'm dealing with just the simplicity of life that you have on an expedition than I do here with our very complex, very distracted life that we have in this country. But I also know that it's probably not going to be very long that I'll be doing this before I'm away again. So I just enjoy every single day.
You touched on something there, Steve, that I really wanted to ask you as well. Tell us something about wildlife here in Britain that perhaps people who live here don't know.
So, wildlife in Britain, there's no doubt that we've screwed our wildlife pretty bad. We've got rid of all of our mega predators. Our biggest carnivore in this country now is a badger, unless you start considering the marine creatures. We have very little truly wild land. Most of our national parks even are very maintained and managed by us as humans. But the little we have is really, really special. And I think that there is not another nation on earth that treasures its nature and its animals as much as we do. We perhaps need to stick up for it a bit more. We need, we're coming into an election in the next few days. I hope this doesn't date this podcast, but we're coming into an election where the only parties who are really talking about nature are the Greens and occasionally the Lib Dems. The main parties have barely talked about it at all. And the reason they're not doing that is because they sense that it's not a huge thing on our agenda. Well, it should be. And, we talked a little bit about how important nature is for kids, but it's important for all of us. Nature can be a massive panacea for so many of our ills, particularly psychological and mental, but physical too. And yet we're allowing it to be chipped away at over time until there is little or nothing left. And I think that particularly for a nation of nature lovers as we are, that just shouldn't be allowed to continue.
You mentioned at the start of this the term, was it nature deficit disorder? Was that the term that you used? I had never heard that before. And I guess that really is that. Can you tell us a little bit about that term in relation to particularly our culture here in the UK and where it originates from, what it means?
So it's a term that was coined in a kind of seminal work called Last Child in the Woods, probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, I guess. And it was based on an awful lot of scientific research that was talking about the negative aspects that we are experiencing, particularly in young people, from that disconnect with nature. Our species has for 50 million years lived an active, outdoors, continually challenged life. And yes, our life today may be better, but evolution doesn't work that quick. We still have so many ways that we need that kind of life. And it's no surprise that we're dissolving into mental health crises, obesity epidemics, so many things that could at very least be curtailed by a better connection to the outdoors, to activity, and to nature. And it's so multifaceted. There are so many things that nature can give us, whether it's from people who, will go birding to get over their crushing anxiety or depression, whether it's those who, like me, myself, I absolutely need physical exercise outside to feel calm, to feel at home, or whether it's just from the general sense of well-being that we get from a connection to nature. We're risking losing so much of that. I'm very lucky in that I get to work for an awful lot of wildlife charities, all the way from the RSPCA to the World Land Trust to the WWF, the wildlife trusts, and through those scouting, I get to see a lot of young people who, if they've never walked barefoot on grass before, they have no idea what any of the bird songs around them are. They probably never gone wild swimming in a river, and with what's happening with our waterways now, maybe they never will. And I think that we're missing a trick. We are, in a potential crisis for our NHS, and we need to be kind of getting in early with the things that prevent so many of the things that are destroying our national health. And an awful lot of those can be addressed through the very, very simple, very old-fashioned things, which are the outdoors, activity, exercise, companionship, and nature.
There was something done, was it in the Shetlands a few years ago, where they started prescribing walks? Like doctors were giving out walks.
Absolutely, yeah. There's been an awful lot of talk about how nature and activity should be prescribed on the NHS, and but until that becomes a thing and it's a part of the the national conversation, it kind of can't be done by the odd doctor here or there. Because can you imagine, you go and see a doctor and you've got a cold and they say take 2 weeks of good sharp brisk walks. You think they were crazy and you get them struck off. But once we start to realize that there is some really good, really simple science behind that, then maybe it would be better appreciated and understood.
To me, there's a huge natural connection between nature and fitness and our interaction with the great outdoors. And when we interact with it and we move our body outside and we are exposed to a whole different host of stresses and stimulus, that our natural homeostasis levels up and we feel better physically, so psychologically, emotionally. One of my questions I wanted to ask you, seeing as you are such a physical specimen of a man, Steve, is all about fitness. And I just wanted to ask you, A, what your training routine looks like, but also what is your why when it comes to fitness?
So fitness is a part of my every single day, and it kind of has to be, both for the job and also because I've had some pretty nasty injuries in the past. In particular, I had a near fatal rock climbing fall in 2011 where I broke my back in 2 places and destroyed my left ankle. Had to have 11 operations to set it right. If I do not stretch and do some kind of exercise every day, then I start to grind down pretty quickly and life becomes unpleasant, and chronic pain is a real serious thing. So I kind of have to train every day. And at my age as well, I'm quite a lot older than you two, and you do realize that everything slows down, and if you don't take really, really good care of yourself, then all of a sudden everything from getting out of bed to going down the stairs in the morning can start to become pretty tricky. I have had to change quite a lot the training that I do. So I used to have everything based around running. So I used to do lots and lots of long fell runs. Every time I rocked up in a new place, I'd just go out for a run. I'd discover the place with running, but running's no fun for me anymore with a fused left ankle and all the other stuff. So I don't run some more. But what I do every day is some kind of calisthenics. So I have my gymnastics rings that I take with me everywhere I go. I've got a TRX that I always take with me, my skipping rope, and I can do pretty much anywhere that's got a tree or a decent door frame. I can do a bodyweight exercise regime in about half an hour that can give me what I need. And if I haven't gotten that, then I'll do some yoga. I'll do just things based around press-ups and handstands and all that sort of stuff. And it's not perfect. If it wasn't for the fact that life is so utterly mental with the kids and with work, then I'd do a lot more. And when I'm home, I do a lot of kayaking and cycling and climbing. But essentially, that calisthenics is just the way forward.
What the origin of that word is? It I'm completely kind of grabbing this, but is it
Good
something?
question.
It's like beautiful movement or something in ancient.
Let's just keep that. Don't even
I'm
look
going to
for
say
it now.
that's what it is. 100%.
Because it's the purest form of strength and using your body weight, and it's an art form, and it's all. I think that's something I'm
A lot
terrible
of it's super old-fashioned. Yeah, a lot of it. You look at people training in Russia in the late 1800s, and they're doing all these same kinds of movements, using all these same kinds of bits of equipment, but they really, really work. And I mean, God, look at a gymnast. Look at their physique. If they were 6 foot tall instead of 4'8", imagine how ripped they'd be.
I did see a video actually, you, Steve, lifting your children. I think that you put on social media. I don't know when you put it up, but using them as kettlebells and bands and whatever it might be. It was very, very impressive. I think you were doing a row whilst doing a bicep curl with your child on the other hand, and I was like, do you know what? That's all I want in my life.
Yeah, unfortunately, with the twins being 4 and Logan being 6. That's not going to be possible for much longer.
It made me feel so kind of inadequate. I posted one video of me shoulder pressing my son over my head, and then I went on for a quick scroll on Instagram and saw like a 5-minute Rocky montage of you just doing every single movement under the sun with your entire family. I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to.
They are very small.
Oh, goodness. Steve, just touching on what we were speaking briefly before, we are coming up to an election at the moment, and a lot of what we see about the United Kingdom is very negative. And, I'm from North Wales originally, from kind of Snowdonia, and I love that part of the world. It's beautiful.
Diolch yn dda iawn.
Yeah.
Harp iawn.
Excellent.
You do speak Welsh. Yeah, you do speak Welsh, don't you?
But there's parts of the UK that are just absolutely stunning, and I love it. And I've, like you, had the pleasure to go to many parts of the world, but I love coming home. There's something about this place. What parts of the United Kingdom are special to you, or are there any parts that you would recommend parents to go out to and adventure and create memories with their little ones with?
Well, your part of the world is probably my favourite. I'd have to say, I'm a honorary lecturer at Bangor University.
That's where I was born. I was born in Bangor.
Oh God, it's just paradise. Any youngsters out there who are listening to this, although actually Dad's podcast, maybe not, but I mean, best university in the nation. If I could have my time again, I would be straight back to Bangor, having all that natural beauty on your doorstep. What more could you ask for? I mean, it's very tempting for me to trot out all of the obvious beautiful places in our nation. The Hebrides, the Isles of Scilly, Wales, Cornwall. But actually, the most important thing is more micro adventures. It's more when you're with your kids, making the best use of the evening after school, of a Saturday morning, of the odd hour here or there, and you can do that even if you're in a city. And it's learning how to do those micro adventures close to hand that don't involve you traveling a big long distance, that don't involve huge amounts of setup, that are just massively important. I think this is something actually that I really learned from Helen, because Helen, my wife, one of the things that she is way better than me at is taking like 5 or 10 minutes and doing a training session. She's got 5 minutes free and she'll do a core workout. And I would never do that. I'd be like, 5 minutes. Oh, God, that's not enough. No, I'll just do something else. But her 5-minute sessions over the course of a week have added up to a couple of extra hours of exercise that I would never have done. And it's the same thing with kids and the outdoors. You got 5 minutes. I'd be tempted to just go, 5 minutes. That's not enough for anything really, is it? I'll fiddle over here with something and they'll sort themselves out in 5 minutes. Whereas if you actually did go, right, 5 minutes, we're going to open the door. Okay, first person to see a bird and tell me what it is gets a present or whatever. And you keep building up those little teeny tiny micro nuggets of the outdoors and nature throughout every single day. And it builds up. It leads towards a much better whole of their kind of holistic understanding of the outdoors and nature.
Talking about 5 minutes, we are running out of time.
Yeah, we are.
And have a very, probably one of the most important questions that we'll ask you today, Steve, if that's okay. If you could spend 24 hours as any animal before then coming back and living as your regular self, what animal would it be and why?
I mean, it's got to be a bird, surely. The ability to fly is something that we as human beings have craved for generations. So yeah, I would like to be a Ruppel's vulture cruising 12,000 meters up in the sky, although preferably without having to come back down to land and eat rotting carcasses.
And Steve, for mine, can I just ask, what animal would you least like to find in your bed in the middle of the night? Take that as you will.
I would probably go for anything parasitic. God, like, I mean, I spend an awful lot of time with mosquitoes underneath the mosquito net. Just one is there's an old saying, isn't there? Anyone who believes that something small can't make a difference should try spending a night with a mosquito in their room.
They are infuriating, aren't they?
They are.
And Steve, another important question. Who would win in a fight between a crocodile versus 100 chickens?
Chickens.
Pecking away.
Are these chickens angry for some reason? Why would the chickens not run? I have so many questions.
Well, we can change it. We can say one elephant versus 50 squirrels.
I thought for a second there you were going to go sensible and go for the elephant versus the crocodile, which I have a sensible answer for. Squirrels?
I just have this vision of being swamped by squirrels. I know some questions will never be answered. We'll leave that open-ended.
I think that's a great place to end it. Steve, thank you so much for your
It's been
time.
an absolute joy, you guys. Thank you so much.
I think, you've taught us so much as parents, and I think those nuggets of advice that you gave at the end to parents about taking the 5 minutes and utilising them rather than just letting them pass you by is really, really incredible. Steve, what are you up to at the moment? What are you doing?
So I've got a bunch of television series coming up with Channel 5 over the next few months. I'm supporting my wife Helen at the Paris Olympics, and then I'm back on tour with my ocean tour, which is going around the UK from Inverness all the way down to Truro and Torquay in October, November kind of time.
Amazing. Well, we'll definitely go, and we'll take the family to that.
You
Cannot
are
wait.
so invited.
Cannot wait.
100%. And we do have an election this week, and Steve Backshall for Prime Minister.
Yeah. Let's get that going viral. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm just going to grab a photo of us here, Steve. Steve, thank you so much. You've been an absolute pleasure.
That was a joy. I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.